The interesting approach about risk is that we always, when we use the word risk, people think like, oh, no way, you can't do that. You're going to get hurt, or you're going to make the wrong decision, or anything like that. But the reality remains that we all have a certain sense of risk in us. And you start to look at that to say, but what is your risk tolerance? So how much risk can an individual really cope with? Something like risk propensity, it's directly linked to your risk tolerance. So the kind of risk that you are willing to take, and whether you can gain something out of this, or will you lose in the process. So where we are using or looking at the risk, particularly currently in the current context, is in the safety environment. So what we then do is that we actually measure a person's risk tolerance. So it's on a gamification platform, and the person needs to blow balloons. So the balloon will, you inflate it by using a tablet. So you will tap on the tablet, and every time when you tap once on the tablet, you earn coins. So what we do say to the individuals doing this assessment, we will say to them, the maximum score you can get is 2,200. If you're going to get 2,200, the developer of the tool will give you the 2,200, and the competition starts between the individuals. So they start psyching one another up. So if you tap this balloon, sometimes you tap it once and then it pops. So the idea is you need to sell it before it pops, because the bigger it gets, the more coins you earn. Okay, so when we do this game, we basically get 4 profiles. So the first one is consistent risk averse. And consistent risk averse individuals is roughly about 49% of our population. So these individuals follow the rules, they don't break the rules, they don't like taking risks, and they are consistent in their behavior. So they tend to behave more or less the same. Okay, so these are almost our good solid citizens in the work environment. So safe people in a way, if you look at them. But then we get consistent risk takers. And our consistent risk takers are individuals, they like taking risks, but they are consistent. And the other thing with them as well, they are consistently adaptable. And that's opposites of one another. But what that basically means is that they tend to adapt their behavior to the situation. So they take risks, but they trust the intuition. They trust the experience. They trust their skills. They read the situation. And this is a very small percentage that we see. It's roughly about 4 to 5% of our employees. And if you look at the last 2011 census that we did in South Africa, at that point of time, we had 55 million people roughly in the country. So if we say 4 to 5%, it's 2.2 million people that can be consistent risk takers. And they are actually our entrepreneurs. So 2.2 million people need to create opportunities for the country to go forward. And if you look at the company per se, and you look at the work environment, you want employees working in a consistent risk-taking environment if they need to look at business opportunities. Senior management, because it's about long-term sustainability, planning for the future. How will we ensure that we will still be viable in 10 years' time and that? So that's where you want your senior management to lie as well in the end. But then we get our problem children. And these together, they roughly about the other 45% then that remains. And this is our erratic behavior. So the first one we get is erratic risk-averse individuals. And this is what people tend to say, because a lot of time when you do this kind of, or determine the risk tolerance, people will say, but I'm a calculated risk taker. If you're a calculated risk taker, you are actually erratic risk averse. Because they don't like taking risks. But 9 out of the 10 times, they will win. So it's like gambling. 9 out of 10 times they may win, but it's the 10th time that may be the problem. Or 9 out of the 10 times you remember, you open the cupboard door, you take out the mug to make a coffee for yourself, and you remember to close the cupboard door. But the 10th time you forget. And then you bump your head and you get an injury as the result of that. So these individuals, what we see of erratic risk-averse individuals are that they tend to become rigid in the behavior. So they tend to not trust the intuition. They don't trust the experience. And in a way, they almost become complacent. So they get to the point where they lose attention and they make mistakes. And that can result in a safety incident. And then if we look at our erratic risk takers, these are our fear of missing out guys. So if somebody jumps off the cliff, they're going to jump. They don't know where they're going to jump, but they're just jumping in case they're going to miss out in the process. And this is a major concern for us because these guys take risks. They like risks. They don't care about risks. They want to take the risk, but they're rigid, again, in their behavior. So if they make a mistake, it can result in a life loss. It can result in a serious injury in the work environment, if not, like I said, a fatality as a result. If it's about in the financial industry, these guys will put big money, big investments in, and they may lose everything because they don't want to be left behind. So our approach is that we put the individuals through a one-day awareness training. So when we start with the one-day awareness training, we start with this finding true north, and we ask the guys, but what drives you to make certain decisions? Why do you make these decisions? What's the consequence of your decision, positive or negative, and how do you approach this? And then we move to the whole thing about adaptability versus rigidity, because we need to change. And I think the important thing first is that taking risks is not a problem. The problem is that people become rigid. So we don't want to drive complacency because that's going to drive rigidity. We want to drive applicability. So when you look at the rules, that you actually apply the rule to the context and you take in consideration the environment, your experience, your intuition, your knowledge that you have. Because sometimes just following a rule can kill you. And you need to apply the rule to the particular situation and not just blindly follow a rule. So in a way, we're moving people from a tunnel vision to have a more broader mind of how they look at things. And when we touch on adaptability and rigidity in the training, we tend to say that if they understand that, the penny drops. Then they understand why did the results come out the way it came out. And it makes sense to them. And then we move to a process where we actually explain to them, because in this theory, and the theory has been developed by Dave, he indicated that there are 10 factors influencing our risk tolerance and the way we tend to take risks. And things like that is like over-familiarity with my equipment. If I'm too familiar with my equipment, the tendency is that I can make a mistake. And something like that, my PPE will save me, my protective clothing. I don't have to worry because my PPE will ensure that I will not die, or I will not make a mistake, or I will be safe. But also things like my role model's behavior. So if my supervisor is going to drive risk behavior, my employees are going to start taking more risks. So we are currently applying it very much in the mining industry, and like I said, in petrochemical industry, because that's where we see a lot of safety incidents. And we also know that with the Minerals Council of South Africa, they have this, and the DMR, Department of Minerals, Mineral Resources, they have this main drive to really get to a zero tolerance in terms of safety incidents, fatalities in the mining and the construction industry as well. But what we're also seeing is that like last week, we were running a program and there was a lady from finance, as an accountant, and she said, but why am I here? Why am I supposed to do this? And it was funny as she went through the program, and she came out as a erratic risk taker, which you don't want for finance people, because finance people should be consistent, risk averse. They should not say no to signing the checks and etc. But when she came out on that and we started asking her questions, it made sense to her. And we asked her typical, we said, but how did you play the game? How did you do the assessment? And she said, she started tapping on the screen, and when the balloon popped, she said, no, I'm going to do this again. And she taps on the screen. So it's totally erratic behavior, not thinking about what she's actually doing. And for us, the drive is really to get people to understand that we have a risk tolerance, each one of us. And what we do with that, we should just be adaptable and not become rigid in our behavior. Because if we're going to be adaptable, We will look differently at our finances. We will look differently at the way we complete tasks sometimes. We will look differently at decisions we tend to make, and even in terms of creating a future as well for other people, being entrepreneurial or being safer in the work environment, etc. But if we're going to be erratic, we can become the hindrance for somebody else. We can result in people getting hurt. And that's what we should change. We should really change, moving from that rigidity to a sense of being more adaptable in situations.